Fellowship. She's helping advance our shared vision here at the Institute of Connecting Research, Community Experience, and Policy to create more effective and evidence-informed solutions for children, for families, and for our communities. Today's conversation is a great example of that work in action, and we are grateful to have her here to lead this important discussion. She's going to introduce our panelists today.
Yes, so I will go from start from Miriam. Miriam Potocky is a social worker, scholar, educator, and researcher whose work centers on refugee resettlement, integration, and well-being. Her scholarship integrates rigorous research design with practical application, including leadership of Project Miracle and multi-year randomized trial examining the use of multidimensional interviewing in refugee case management. She has extensive experience in program evaluation, evidence synthesis, and the development of practice-informed frameworks that bridge research, policy, and frontline service delivery. Her work includes the foundational text, best practices for social work with refugees and immigrants, and her most recent book, Czechoslovakia's Cold War Refugee Children, Contemporary Resonance, combines memoir and archival oral history with the aim of informing the future. I read from Miriam's bio, but Miriam was my doctoral advisor. And the book that I mentioned, Best Practices for Social Work with Refugees and Immigrants, was one of the first books written in the social work profession that even acknowledged work with refugees and immigrants. I think 15 years ago or 14, maybe, I learned about her through her book, and it was just a dream come true to become a doctoral student and work with her. Thank you very much for being here. And Miriam Rafifa is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Arlington and program director of Forced Migration Initiative. Her work centers on forced migration, focusing on how displacement, immigration enforcement, and legal vulnerability shape family life, caregiving, and child well-being. She also studies human trafficking within border migration system, examining exploitation, protection gaps, and community-based responses across borders. And one thing that was not in Mariam's bio is that she comes from extensive level of field work. She worked with multiple humanitarian organizations as a service provider before joining academia. We were colleagues at United Nations a decade ago, even more than a decade ago, yes. Yes, and you shared likewise. Yes. Family reunion. Angus Thomas is the founder and executive chairman of the Hope Education Project, an NGO delivering human trafficking prevention education in northern Ghana. In 2019, he encountered a Nigerian woman trafficked to Dubai for sexual exploitation. What follows was 4 years of victim repatriation, the exposure of multiple trafficking networks in UAE, and compilation of case files, compilation of text files delivered to NAPTIV for prosecution. Recognizing that rescue alone cannot solve trafficking, Angus found Hope Education Project, to disrupt it at the source. HEP delivers prevention education in Ghana, education service, junior high schools, and survival-led community programs in Tamale. It equips young people with the knowledge and a skill to protect themselves against human trafficking and to keep themselves safe online. HEP has research partnership with the University of Texas at Arlington and Washington University's Brown School. We are very lucky that Angus is visiting us from London. He's based in London, but constantly travels to Ghana because of the education projects he has there. I have a couple questions for the panelists that I prepared based on my knowledge about their work, but I try to be brief so we can save some time for audience here and online to ask their questions from the panelists as well. So, and I want to start with you, I guess. I really hope that you tell us about some of the stories behind your work. And to start, can you tell us a bit about the work of Hope Education Project and how it began?
Sure. So, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. So my journey started as a Good Samaritan act in Dubai when I was on a layover New Year's Eve 2019, and I met a young woman who propositioned me for sex as I was leaving the hotel, and I said no. She looked emaciated, and I said, "Well, I'm going to the supermarket, so I'll buy you some food." And I asked her if she wanted to be there, which probably later we'll talk about is an interesting question to ask somebody who's been trafficked. And she said no, and then I hatched a plan. Actually went back to my hotel room and said to my wife this story, hoping she would believe for me. But she said no, you need to get involved if that's what you feel you want to do. And so I met this young woman the next day, and 3 days later, through working through checking in at the hotel and the doorman there, I managed to get her back to Lagos. But she told me there were 22 other women in the room with her. So unfortunately, I committed my life at that point to rescuing survivors of Nigerian survivors of sex trafficking to the UAE. So what I quickly realised is that money was running out, and I had a very collaborative relationship with NAPTIP, the Nigerian anti-trafficking police. But I realised that education was, so much more effective financially. So I spent quite a lot of time. I adopted one of the girls that I rescued, and we met in Ghana, and I fell in love with Ghana and the people of Ghana, and decided that Ghana was a place where I could work, and I created a program which is based on participatory theatre and traditional classroom learning. And we equip children over 5 modules in junior high school. So we're working with junior high school 1, so 12 to possibly 16 years old. We take them through in a culturally appropriate way, in their own language, with culturally appropriate cartoons and trafficking scenarios, which are extremely familiar to these children. And then we produce a play at the end, which they deliver to the rest of the school. And then we have a community module on the Saturday following completion of that 5-week module, where the children, it's a survivor led with a local survivor who was trafficked to the Gulf. We do a 3-hour session with them, and the children present their plays to their aunties and uncles. So far we've been based in Tamale, and there's no commercial imperative for anyone to find any work in Tamale. It's really a labour pool, it's an agricultural area, it's under severe stress from climate change, and there's been a lot of migration into the cities, and people are desperate, and obviously poverty is the main driver. And what's driving that poverty is the world economy, obviously, but obviously climate change plays a big part of that. So, and there's a whole research piece around that. So.
Thank you so much, Angus. And yes, I really want to come back about that narrative because I think that's important, and that's part of the work that you're now considering in research. But next, Miriam, you work closely with Angus, and your work has also a dimension of policy and policy research into that. How do you see border and migration policies inadvertently create or exacerbate vulnerabilities in relationship to trafficking?
Hello everyone, good morning. Yes, it's actually all comes from policy. The policies are really, especially now, they're trying to deter migration. But what they do inadvertently is that they put people in a very bad situation and make them more vulnerable. That makes them at high risk for exploitation and human trafficking. Like it doesn't matter that if you come up with a policy that stops you want to stop the border crossing, you want it to stop migration, but it doesn't stop there. It just challenges it to like very informal ways, irregular ways that many people, because of like we cannot say that okay, we have this policy and now people stop coming to, for instance, to the United States from the countries that are like, for instance, Central American countries, because there are a lot of violence there and people cannot live there. It's like it comparing the situation that they have, the journey, even though it's dangerous, even though it's like very unlikely for them to have a pathway to legal residency, for instance, in the United States, they do a cost analysis for themselves and they decide, oh, I'm gonna go. But this makes them very vulnerable to like for if we are talking about the context in the United States, to for instance coyotes who like they receive a big chunk of money from them to bring them, and they probably false promises. And I think that's the same thing. The same thing from like the women that Ernest did the interview with, and I was like listening to them to analyze from Nigeria. It's all false promises that okay, I'm gonna like a madam, like a lady, a very nice lady comes in and approaches you, and they give you a lot of promises that oh, you're going to go to UAE to work in a hairdresser shop, and you can send money to your family, and then they decide to okay, it puts me out of poverty, and then they decide to do, and it makes them very high risk for exploitation. And again, going back to the context of the U.S., what it does is that many things like for instance, mixed status families or undocumented immigrants, is that this they become more vulnerable in a way that they don't want to seek any kind of services. So because of this fear that if I go and seek like even preventive care and like emergency care, if I'm in a state like Florida or Texas, and then they're going to ask me for my immigration status, I'm not gonna go there. If there is a child abuse, it's a domestic violence situation, they know if they call the authorities, the person is going to get deported. And that was one of the stories that I heard. A woman with 4 children, she was abused by her husband, and her young, like 13-year-old son calls the police, and she told me, I begged them not to deport them, but to give them therapy, because he's a good man. He's just drinking and he gets violent. And what's next time that she knows that the man is deported, and then she's left with 4 kids, rent to pay, and she was making $200 a week, and you can't live with $200 a week. So what happens next is that if people see abuse, they're not gonna report it, and that's what policy does. So this was the long way of saying how the policy can create or exacerbate vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Miriam. So Miriam collaborates with Agnes. They are starting to document some of the research and findings and connection with policy, the work. But my question from you, Miriam, is that the gap between what we do as researchers and what is actually practice. And the reason that I kept this question for you is that you had a very fruitful career as a researcher. Your book, multiple other contributions, interventions that you designed, and then you switch. Still, it has a research component, but to an organization that is famous for providing services, IRC, International Rescue Committee. Now you're translating some of your research work into practice. So my question for you is that how better researchers who are in this room or future researchers can fill that gap, the practice research gap?
Thank you for that question, Mitra. And before I get to that question, though, I just want to mention I think we've been largely talking about sex trafficking so far, but I'm sure, as you all know, there is also labor trafficking, and obviously all over the world. And here in the US, there's trafficking in industries such as hospitality. Domestic servitude is a major problem in terms of trafficking, and in agriculture. Those are kind of major venues of trafficking in the United States. And foreign born individuals in the US are particularly vulnerable to that type of trafficking, as well as sex trafficking, of course. So I just wanted to kind of broaden, our perspective on what trafficking is. As far as the research to practice gap. So I've been a social work professor for 35 years, something like that. I've been teaching evidence-based practice all of this time, and I have seen that gap narrow over 35 years. So it is not as big a gap as it was, and particularly now that I'm in a practice-oriented setting in a NGO, I have more direct contact with service providers, and they are eager, almost begging for evidence-based practices to implement. They have pressure from the top in terms of funding. Everyone wants to see results, and they want to see results as well for their clients, and they want that sense of reward that you get when you see the hard data and see that, yes, I've had the feeling that my client is doing better, but here I have the real evidence. So I think there's a desire there. The gap is definitely narrowing. What we are doing at the IRC, in part, is disseminating research information for a provider and practitioner audience. So we're, translators, we are knowledge brokers, putting these existing research studies into very digestible, provider-friendly briefs or webinars, trainings. We do a lot of social media, just getting the information out there in a way that is approachable by service providers. And we also apply implementation science to that process so that there's a process to follow, as you all know, with a variety of implementation science models. And those models, of course, also allow you to evaluate the process and the outcomes as you are going along and provide guidance on what to do next. And the implementation science is really all-encompassing, looking at the entire social environment and political environment of an organization in the process of trying to establish evidence-based practices.
Thank you so much. And we are recording the session because we want to put it in our YouTube channel or Grammar School YouTube channel, and we will link some of the resources that IRC has in terms of briefs. I think Switchboard is one of the platforms that you also contribute. So it's amazing resource for practitioners. So Agnes, going back to you and the stories, you recently conducted series of interviews with survivors. And I have heard pieces of it, I have seen pieces of it, but you are the one who conducted all the interviews. Can you share some insights or preliminary findings from those interviews?
Yes, so together with Miriam, we've I've just completed about somewhere between 30 and 40 hours of interviews with women who have been trafficked to the UAE for sexual exploitation and repatriated. Obviously, I've been speaking, mentoring, dealing with survivors now for 5 years. And every time I think I hear a survivor story, I think I've never heard anything like that. And every time I do a new interview, I discuss some subtle dynamic that makes their suffering, or my understanding of their suffering, even more comprehensive. And I'm shocked every time. But I mean, one of the themes that is coming out of our work is coming back to this thing about men's protective factors. So we calculated we haven't done the deep dive research on this, but very top line, with 24 survivors, they had nearly 40,000 interactions with men. Some were incarcerated for 4 years, and some were incarcerated for about 3 months. But in those 40,000 interactions, what we found was only in 5 cases did a man ask the question, do you want to be here? Are you okay? Do you need help? In 40,000 interactions. But what is staggering from very top line preliminary is that 4 of those men gave the women access to a phone, and 1 of those men actually secured her rescue. But in all 5 instances, when a man asks, are you okay? The woman secured her freely. So, and what we specifically were looking at is something that I've been pondering on for a long time, which is the mental survival strategies of a woman who has been trafficked. Like, what keeps you sane? What stops you, because many Nigerians, West Africans, East Africans die in the UAE. So what keeps you, what sustains you? And generally, I mean, it's no surprise to any woman in this room that is having a child is one of the central protective factors. Even though in one case that child was conceived through rape by an uncle at the age of 11 years old, and she was trafficked at 13 and returned home 4 years later to a 6-year-old son. So even in that situation, the bond to her child was so strong. Faith played an enormous part, and the way that people framed their faith, or when I spoke to them about it, what do you think this says about God's plan for you? If she was saying that, well, God provided for me, God provided the rescue, well, how did the same God take you there? What was her framing around that? And most thought some thought that maybe she'd done something in previous life, this was her punishment. This was just bad luck. Or maybe, and in many cases, some of them reported that this was God testing them. This was a test for them. And out of this work, hopefully, is going to come more around men as protective factors, because one of the things, in the UAE, for example, there's 11 million people, 7.5 million of them are migrant men. So there is this demand. Some of those men, as Miriam was saying, are actually actively being trafficked. And then if you take into that the obfuscation of the kafala system, you've actually got quite a toxic environment for sex workers anyway. So one of the themes that's coming out for me is men's protective factors, and that includes educating boys in the classroom about how they coerce sex from young girls, which is exactly the same as the techniques that traffickers use, just at lower scale. And men from fathers all the way to being consumers of sex. And, I'm a lived experience practitioner. I have no academic background in this, which is why I'm surrounded by 2 amazing researchers and supporters. But the role, men have a role to play in this. And what it seems to me as an outsider, if you like, to the academic literature, is there's been such a focus on protecting women, and we've taken our eye off the ball in terms of the men, because men are different to women. That is, it seems like an obvious statement, but the drivers that drive men are different to the drivers that drive women. And one of the things we're going to look at, and one of the things that's emerging, is how do we address that difference, and how we educate the men to act as for bystander type interventions. And I know there's been some research done around that. The research tends to be the research that I've read tends to be binary. This is the man, this is woman, but we don't go into the factors that are driving the man, particularly in this case of the UAE, for example, where there is that pressure of men being there for a long time and crossing the threshold, maybe as a father, a brother, a son, suspending their moral judgment to a child that's being drugged and then walking away and not even asking a question. So, yeah.
Thank you, Angus. And I know that you're looking into it to explore the data more, and I cannot wait to see some publications coming or policy briefs coming out of it. I want to go back to Miriam and one of her interventions, Project Miracle. So in your work, Miriam, you're using motivational interviewing, or intervention you design is based on using motivational interviewing for very specific vulnerable population, refugees. And considering the work that Angus doing, I wanted to see if you see any implications for survivors of trafficking or working with survivors of trafficking.
Yes, so just to say a little bit about the project, we are currently in the midst of a 3-year RCT to see whether the use of motivational interviewing within case management for resettled refugees will lead to improved outcomes. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with motivational interviewing. Very briefly, it's a relationship building approach focusing on compassion, partnership, acceptance, and empowerment of the client, and focusing on aligning client goals with practitioner goals or organizational goals. My expertise is in the United States, so I'll speak about that. So in the US, survivors of trafficking who are foreign born, I'll speak about them because that's, again, my area of specialization. If they are identified as such and agree to cooperate with law enforcement, they are eligible for a special type of visa, the T visa, that allows them to remain in the United States. Additionally, they can be so-called certified by the Department of Health and Human Services, which allows them to receive the exact same services and benefits that refugees do. So it's the exact same program. It's run by the same federal organization, the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So it's the same services. Therefore, if our experiment works with refugees, it seems very likely that it would also work with survivors of human trafficking. Yeah, so that's it. And what I think also is very applicable outside the US, MI as a whole has been used around the world. So I think it really has potential there as well.
Thank you so much. And moving from intervention to kind of causes and a little bit to the area that I'm really interested in, poverty. And Mariam, I want to get, so because you work with mixed status families, and the population that you work with, many of them are impacted by problem of poverty. But I want to get your perspective on how the context of poverty as a root cause play into shaping vulnerabilities to trafficking, or vulnerabilities of population that you're working with.
Of course. So one of the things that you're very better expert than I am is on multi-dimensional poverty, and I think that's the root cause of all these things, whether in the US mixed status families or in Nigerian women, population in Ghana. It's that it makes the individual in a situation that is very vulnerable for everything. They understand that there's poverty and they want to come out of it, and and you hold on whatever promises that you hear, and then I really upon listening to the interviews that Alice got, the one thing that stuck with me was the level of spiritual exploitation that's linked to poverty. So, like many of these women, they were, in addition to promises of better life, they were also exploited because of their spiritual or faith or belief, and they were kind of like there is a ceremony. You probably have better knowledge on that than I have. It's called Judo ceremony. That they were kind of enslaved because of their spiritual beliefs, and this is so strong, and even that it like it gives them with all of the suffering that they're going through, that they're really attached to the promise to what they believe. And for me that was one thing. And in the mixed status families, I think I see the same too. Like it's a protective factor against all the things, like to have God, all like it's a source of resilience, but also it's a source of um vulnerability too. So that is one thing that I found it interesting. The other part of the poverty is that it brings also a lot of social, I'm call it isolation, because you don't have like this is so multi-directional or multifaceted that like if a child, as U.S. citizen child in a mixed status family, like legally they are entitled to every rights on as of their native like the children born to native parents. But you see that they're not enjoying those rights, they're not receiving because of those fear of like poverty and legal status hand in hand. That is like the parents, they don't want to send the kids, for instance, for a social event because they fear that even if the social event might be free, because of the fear they don't send it, then it goes hand in hand. It exasperated the whole thing. And I want to add another point of it in the research that we do in Florida. So we are studying the impact of immigration policy, state immigration policy. So in 2023, there was a policy and a law that came into effect that they required public agencies, including hospitals, to ask for immigration status. And we are talking with families to see what is the impact of that immigration policy on their health behavior. One thing beside the whole immigration policy and legal status is hand in hand is cost, and that goes back to poverty. So like a lot of these families, they have U.S. citizen children who are eligible to apply for all like medical governmental benefits or other things like TANF, but they don't do it because of this like hand in hand interaction of legal status and cost. They don't go say help for themselves and for their children. It's just amazing how that mindset is like it blurs everything. You just at some point you don't understand whether this is this is because of poverty or because it's of legal vulnerability.
Thank you. And Miriam was among the first who even considered the idea of poverty as multidimensional among refugees. So one of the earlier papers that I found on this topic in among refugees specifically is that Miriam who looked at like okay, not income, not just employment, but beyond that, the standards of living, other aspects of life. So yeah, and then I ended up writing my whole dissertation on that. We have I want to take like 15 minutes for Q&A. But instead of asking my final question that I sent you, how about I ask you what final word you want to add about your research or what you want to share with the audience? I know that's a surprise.
Oh no, surprise question.
Well, we can start from Angus, so you have like 2 minutes to think. I can also ask a final question, but I thought that giving you a chance to share something that you want to share as like to end the discussion of the panel, something that you think is important to share about the work that you are doing.
Okay. So what I want to share is, if anybody comes across this, that it's better. It's better to act than do nothing. It's better to ask and listen to your instincts. So from my point of view, I think the trajectory is going to be along this line of men's protective factors. I hadn't appreciated that this was so under researched and represented. And I think there's a mine of opportunity here for educating men, accepting that this is a behaviour that goes on, and educating men to care more. And this starts right from young boys as well. You know, if we can get into, in my own context in Tamale, in the areas that we work, if we can talk to the boys and identify how they are coercing transactional sex from the girls. I mean, the girls are having transactional sex at junior high school 1, 2, 3 level in return for data, which then gets them onto our OT's phone, that gets them further exploited online. So it's just a trajectory. So if we can start with young boys and include them in the solution, because when I first started doing this work, I thought it's all about women, it's all about women, it's all about girls. But we need to bring in more of the boys into the conversation.
Great. And we are going to hold the microphone closer to us for the online audiences. Okay, thank you, Maria.
Yes. So what I want to share is that I think in the room and probably online, I might be wrong, but there are mostly researchers, right? So one thing that I really want us to think about as researchers is that how do we keep this going? How do we not sit in our offices and to make an impact? Is like it's partnership, and that is difficult. That's very difficult to have different actors. All of us, we come from like his representing a community-based organization. Miriam is coming from a big NGO. And I'm like looking at myself and Mitra as researchers in university. And I think what keeps good results is to have this partnership, to have to be open to learn, because without Angus, I wouldn't even have like known about these things. No access to the population that he got to talk to, or without my community partner in Florida, I wouldn't have even had the chance to talk to any mixed status family member. So I'm just want us to think about what makes a good partnership, what makes it, what type of characteristics we should have as researchers to close these gaps and be closer to the field and to have this translational research.
Thank you, Maria. Sorry, Miriam, about my surprise question. Yes.
What she said. Yes, very much. I agree that we need collaboration between researchers and the field. And in particular, I would love to see more program evaluation as to what works for whom and when. I think not to, well, just say. I think I wrote the first one, the first evaluation of a human trafficking program in the United States, which was the Florida Freedom Partnership. And that was around 2008. I don't believe I've seen any other evaluations from the world. I might be mistaken. I haven't done a search, but if they're out there, it's not many. So I beg you, those of you who are researchers, please partner with uh, organizations and providers doing this work to find out again what works for whom under what conditions.
Thank you, Miriam. And yes, I saved exactly 15 minutes for Q&A, and I know there are many researchers that I respect a lot in this room. So now the floor is open for online participants or in-person participants for Q&A. Yes, Tanya.
Thank you very much. This was fascinating. Thank you. So my question is for Angus. Your statistic that only 5 out of 40,000 men actually asked the question, "Are you okay?" is quite staggering. And I certainly appreciate that you're wanting to do the education and work with men at a younger age. But I was wondering, is there anything that can be done in the moment for the women themselves who are victims? Is there any research or anything behind that so that, as you could say, as you said, the men could actually recognize the humanity of the women or re-engage with their moral authority, that sort of thing, so that maybe that number 5 could go up? It's just quite surprising.
Surprising is probably an understatement. As you said in the beginning of your question, I think one of the problems is I think what you're aiming at is, could the survivors ask for help themselves? Is that kind of? So I asked that question, why didn't you ask? That was one of the questions across all 24 interviews. Some of them were too drugged to say they needed help. The effect of juju is extremely powerful. So juju, for people who aren't aware of it, is they might take some menstrual blood, they will take some pubic hair, they might take an item of clothing, or in many cases, they were told to preserve their sanitary pads to take to this juju ceremony. And they take them to a river or some special shrine, special in inverted commas, and they convince this woman that she needs to earn money and return the traffickers' investment in their move to greener pastures. And the indication is that if they don't adhere to this, their families will suffer tremendously for generations and generations. So they're preying on ignorance and tribal tradition and that type of thing. The other thing is that when the girls are told not to interact with the men that are brought to see them, that is very brutally enforced through beatings, rape from the men that are the security, if you like. Because in every instance of a trafficking ring that I've dealt with involving Nigerians in UAE, there is always a madame, a female, at the centre of it. But the boys, the men, some of the families, cousins, whatever, are the ones that control the girls on a day-to-day basis. So it's and in some instances, the West African girls are not allowed to see West African men, precisely for this reason, that their countrymen might intervene and say, do you need help? So a large element of the, shall we say, the worst or most exploitative interactions were with Arab men and Pakistanis and Indians as well. So yeah, it's an obvious thing to think. Why don't they say, "I want to go home"? But the thing is, the punishment for doing that, including hot chili pepper being put between the lady's legs, it's too horrific. So they might try it once, but they wouldn't try it again.
Thank you so much. I'm curious to hear from each of you, just across the different contexts and the really rich applied experience that you have. Kind of looking a bit more broadly at the policy side. So for each of you, just in the work that you done, I would be really curious to hear if there is a specific policy provision that you see as most impactful in shaping sort of the circumstances or prospects of the people that you work with who are at risk of trafficking or who are forced migrants, whether or not it relates to migration explicitly on the surface. And I'm also curious regarding if there is a policy like that, how you think academics can most strategically engage in terms of conducting or disseminating research to help perhaps shift policy in that direction.
I'll go ahead and begin. Again, my focus is on the U.S. So, as you may know, in the U.S., we have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and that covers prevention, prosecution, and what's the third P? Protection for victims of trafficking, be they foreign born or domestic. And so that policy and its several subsequent reauthorizations are the major policy pertaining to this population. And honestly, I have no issue with the policy. It covers those three P's. It's comprehensive. Well, I guess my only issue with it is the protection part, where in order to get the protection, the victim or survivor has to cooperate with law enforcement. So that is certainly a disincentive for many because they're afraid that they or their families will face retribution from the traffickers. So that is a problematic aspect. But other than that, I think it's a good, comprehensive, solid policy. It was a bipartisan policy passed back then. It has continued to receive bipartisan support, and just recently I saw that they're maintaining their funding at a level which is remarkable in this current circumstances. So it appears that even the federal government remains committed to helping trafficking survivors.
I also know like more about immigration policy than human trafficking policies. But what I say that I agree with Miriam that human trafficking policies are good in the U.S. What makes them less effective, or like most of the states, like even the states, human trafficking policies are good. But what makes them most ineffective is the fear of the like involvement with the legal authorities, and because what we are dealing with is multiple vulnerability. So it's not just the being victim of human trafficking. Sometimes if there are like other aspects to this, like there might be a petty crime like attached to being exploited, that like deter people from seeking help or from disclosing what's going on, or if the person is an immigrant, or they are from they live with legal vulnerability. And I say legal vulnerability is not just, especially now, is not just having no status. It's so many people, they have like temporary statuses that can in a night go away. So that makes them like multiple vulnerable, like so it's just the way that maybe that the chilling effect that is um in the large immigration policies are going down, and it makes people not to seek help or disclose, or have like fear of what they disclose in interactions with authorities, I would say.
So I'll just add quickly to that, and I'm also of the same opinion. There is no shortage of money to create policies. I mean, governments get money from universities and grants and what have you to create policies. My experience as a lived experience practitioner has been is the enforcement of those policies. So in one particular case where I spent 5 years pursuing with NAPTIP, this one particular human trafficker who absconded, went back to the UAE, no extradition treaty, was captured by an honest immigration official at Lagos Airport, amen. And she was incarcerated, and on 6 counts of human trafficking, the judge misapplied the law and gave her a $7,000 fine in lieu of a 20-year sentence. So that is no incentive or disincentive for any trafficker, where you have laws on the books that are not even being applied. And then I just want to answer your first or second question, the other half of the question, which was about how can researchers help. And if you look at my own personal experience, I've been driven by goodness knows what to do the work that I do. And the work that I do is completely valueless without the support of Miriam and Mitra, because in a way their work out of the context as me and the people I work with, Mary Harbury, Tanale, and our volunteers, without that, their work is slightly meaningless. So collaboration, I have struggled with collaboration the 5 years I've been doing this, because what I find is that everybody's holding on to what's theirs like this. So no oxygen can get in, no innovation can get in, and everyone sits in their silos. And I have this problem in Ghana between NGOs as well. So for me, the value is I spent a long time looking around for somebody else to solve my problem, which is I had no program. And when I spoke to universities, they wanted 125,000, 200,000. I spoke to Indian NGOs, she wanted, I can't remember, 90,000 to share their program. I thought, enough, let's get on with some action. So in a way, for me, my personal experience is that you don't need to wait for an academic to create a program for you. But what is useful is for someone to come in behind you and evaluate the effectiveness of your program, so that we can iterate and modify and use the energy of these small grassroots organizations, because these are people who are either working for free or at very, very low cost, because their heart is with the clients, if you see. Like the people we serve is where my focus is, not on maintaining an overnight style NGO, that keeps my car paid and a group of staff. So for me, the opportunities are with grassroots organizations, no matter where their program came from. It's the output we need to be looking for, and the collaboration needs to be the assessment of that output and the iteration of the input.
We also have a large audience online, and some of them have questions. So next, I'm going to ask one of the questions in the chat from our online audience. The question is, there's a significant disconnect between research and practice. How can cross-sector collaboration among law enforcement, immigration agencies, and ministries responsible for women's affairs be strengthened to develop coordinated strategies for prevention, protection, and rehabilitation? And the question has a second part. How can system ensure that individuals who are rescued receive sustained support that reduces the risk of re-exploitation?
Sorry, it seems like I've been speaking too much. So the most significant thing about survivor support is consistency and long-term support. And I discovered that to my cost over time. Mental health services is first and foremost beyond anything, because when a woman returns from being, in my case, sex trafficked, she returns with something we don't hear anybody talking about, which is shame. And shame is a killer, because it keeps a woman inside, in the dark of her room, for the rest of her life, because she's too embarrassed to go outside, because her trauma has not been taken care of. So what we need to do, first and foremost, in my view, is consistent long-term facilities, sisterhood initiatives where people can come together and share their experience. Because you come home with shame, you also come home having not fulfilled your family's expectations. If you told your family you were eating trafficking, then you come home with no money. So that's shame. You come home possibly HIV positive. That's like a death sentence in some areas of Nigeria if people get hold of that. The coordination part from my, be very quick on this, the coordination part from my view is I think there needs to be better training of the judicial, like the arms of the of government that look after human trafficking policy, and police, EOCO, other organisations. I think they would benefit enormously from an influx of women in those positions, because at the moment we've got a male-dominated enforcement situation, and what I see happening is, like we were talking about this earlier, young drug addicts who can't do transactional sex and are immediately entering the criminal justice system because they're stealing the but young women who are caught selling sex, for example, are kept neatly, the enforcement officer and the judicial system seems to be able to sort of sideline these women for, I think, reserving their supply of exploitation. And so for me, it would be, just off the top of my head, more women in all areas of enforcement.
So, one thing that I wanted to mention is that I think we don't speak the same language. With law enforcement, with big international organizations such as the United Nations, we both work for United Nations Office on Control Crime, and one of the things that the mandate is just to work anti-trafficking. Then we work with police agencies, law enforcement, and it's fascinating for me is that we don't have shared language. We each are thinking about our own thinking, and Angus did another interview with a police officer, and I was listening to. I was present at the interview and listening, and what he was saying made a lot of sense. And then when you look back and there are a lot of issues, but I think the most important thing is to find out how we should talk is the same language, and I think this is on researchers to find a shared language that everybody can speak. So because when we were talking to this police officer, I had a lot of issues with them. They were also doing a lot of work, and also I feel that like us researchers sometimes look down to law enforcement, and that's a mistake. So it's all ongoing finding that shared language.
Yes, again, like what she said. I think the difficulty with the language stems from the different missions of the two professions, right? So law enforcement is concerned with social control, whereas we as social workers are concerned with social care. So the two are in some way not necessarily incompatible, but just the whole mindset it does not come from the same place. So of course I've been on some task forces that are, community wide, including law enforcement, social service professionals, health providers, and all of that. So that is start there if that's not happening. And then it occurred to me, some localities in the US are doing some a sort of pilot studies, I guess, by pairing social workers with law enforcement officers to go out on crisis calls. So I'm just thinking, could that kind of pairing and closer one-to-one partnership when it comes to preventing and protecting victims, if that might be a valuable approach. I have no idea. It's a passing thought.
Thank you so much. So it is time to end the panel. We are at time. Clark Cox Policy Institute has a couple announcements and an evaluation form for us. But I just want to acknowledge that this panel has been sponsored by Clark Cox Policy Institute and Brown Global Programs. We are very grateful to both entities for supporting this work. And I will pass it to Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us in person and online. And if you enjoyed our session today, we just invite you to continue to join us for our future Senior Policy Fellows policy discussions. We'll have 2 more events coming up in June on food policy and guaranteed income programs. So we would love to have you at those events as well. You can find out more about those on our website. And then we'd love to hear your feedback on today's event. So please let us know in our evaluation form so we can keep improving our events. But thank you so much for being here, and for our panelists for coming all this way and talking with us and sharing their knowledge and wisdom, and also to Mitra for bringing this together. So thank you.